I run an electronics repair shop in Seoul. Last Tuesday, this American tourist came in holding his phone like it was about to explode. He'd cracked his screen pretty badly after dropping it on the subway. I told him the repair would cost 45,000 won, which is about $40. He stared at me, pulled out his wallet, then asked if I accepted payment plans. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He explained that back home, even minor medical procedures require monthly installments. So he'd assumed phone repairs worked the same way? I showed him the price again, and he actually asked if that included the consultation fee for looking at it. When I said no, that's the total price for parts and labor. He looked at me like I'd just told him Santa was real. He paid in cash, then spent 10 minutes taking photos of the receipt because he said his friends back home wouldn't believe it. Meanwhile, another American woman who overheard this started telling everyone in the shop about how she paid $18,000 just for an MRI scan of her knee. The whole shop went quiet. Someone asked if that was with insurance, and she said yes. That was her portion after insurance paid their share. One of my elderly customers literally said she'd rather die. The American nodded like this was perfectly reasonable. Later that week, I fixed a laptop for an exchange student from Texas. While I was working, she mentioned she'd been avoiding going to the hospital for a persistent cough because she was terrified of the bill. I reminded her we have national health insurance here, and she could see a doctor for maybe $20. She thought I was scamming her. She actually Googled it right there in my shop to verify. When she realized I was telling the truth, she burst into tears. The phone guy came back 3 days later, not because anything was wrong with his repair, but because he wanted to know if I also fixed people. I had to explain that I only fix electronics. He seemed genuinely disappointed, then asked if Korea had medical tourism packages. Because apparently, getting a plane ticket to Asia, staying in a hotel for a week, having surgery, and flying back to America is still cheaper than having the same surgery in an American hospital? I thought he was exaggerating. He showed me an article about it on his phone. He was not exaggerating. I teach economics at a university in Stockholm, and we had an American guest lecturer last month who kept insisting that healthcare works better as a free market commodity. During the Q&A session, one of my students asked him how much he pays monthly for health insurance. He said $450 just for himself. The entire lecture hall gasped. He seemed confused by their reaction, so he added that this was actually a pretty good rate. And he's really lucky because his deductible is only $6,000. I had to pause the session to explain to my Swedish students what a deductible even is. 3 of them thought he was describing some kind of punishment system. When he clarified that he has to pay $6,000 out of his own pocket before his insurance company will cover anything, 2 students walked out. They later told me they thought he was lying as part of some elaborate pedagogical exercise about dystopian economic systems. He was invited back the following week to continue his talk on innovation incentives. But he spent most of the session defending why Americans need to choose between paying rent and buying insulin. One student asked him what happens if someone can't afford their medication. He said they often ration it by taking half doses or skipping days. Another student asked if people die from this, and he admitted yes, sometimes they do. The room went completely silent. Our department head quietly suggested we move on to a different topic. The lecturer seemed genuinely baffled about why everyone was so upset. Later told me over coffee that Swedes just don't understand the value of consumer choice. I asked him what choices diabetic patients have when insulin costs $700 a month. He said they can choose which brand. I suggested we end the coffee meeting early. My brother manages a pharmacy in Melbourne, and he called me last week absolutely bewildered. An American customer had come in with a prescription for a common antibiotic and asked how much it would cost. My brother told him about $8. The guy accused him of lying and demanded to see the real price. My brother showed him the register screen. The American stared at it for a full minute, then asked if that was just the copay. My brother explained, "We don't really have copays here. That's the actual price." The guy pulled out his phone and showed my brother a photo of his last bill for the same. Antibiotic in Florida, $430. My brother thought it was photoshopped. It wasn't. The American then asked if he could fill multiple prescriptions and ship them back home, because even with international shipping, it would be cheaper than buying them in the States. My brother had to explain that's technically illegal. But the guy just nodded slowly and said he'd heard trafficking medication was a growing business. He said it like he was considering career options. When my brother checked him out, the guy kept asking if there were hidden fees that would show up later, like a facility charge or a dispensing fee or a consultation fee. My brother kept saying no. It's $8 total. The American paid, examined the receipt from every angle like he was checking for watermarks, then asked for a written statement confirming this was the final price. He wanted it notarized. My brother gave him a handwritten note instead. And the guy left looking like he'd just discovered a portal to another dimension. He apparently came back the next day with 3 other Americans he'd met at his hostel. They bought enough antibiotics to stock a small clinic and acted like they'd just pulled off an elaborate heist. One of them asked my brother if Australia was accepting refugees from healthcare systems. I worked the front desk at a dental clinic in Copenhagen, and this American patient came in last month for a routine cleaning. Afterwards, I handed him the bill, 280 kroner, about $40. He looked at it, looked at me, then asked where the rest of it was. I didn't understand the question. He explained that his last cleaning in America cost $900, so he was expecting something similar here. I told him that was the complete bill. He asked if that included the x-rays. I said we didn't take x-rays because he didn't need any. He seemed shocked by this, then explained that in America, his dentist does full x-rays at every 6-month cleaning, whether necessary or not. I explained that here we only do x-rays when clinically indicated, usually every 2 to 3 years for healthy patients. He stared at me and said, "So you're telling me my American dentist has been charging me for unnecessary x-rays twice a year for a decade?" I just nodded. He sat down in the waiting room and didn't move for 20 minutes. When he finally stood up, he asked if Denmark had a statute of limitations on filing complaints against foreign medical providers. I told him I had no idea, but probably yes. He left looking like someone had just explained that professional wrestling isn't real. My sister works in medical billing at a hospital in Dublin. She told me this story last Sunday. An American tourist had come to the emergency room with what turned out to be appendicitis. They removed his appendix, kept him for 2 nights, and sent him home with pain medication and antibiotics. The total bill came to about 3,000 euros. When she handed it to him, he started crying. She immediately called the hospital administrator, thinking there'd been a terrible mistake, or that the man couldn't afford it. The administrator came down, reviewed everything, and confirmed the bill was correct. The American kept crying, but he was smiling. He told them that in America, the same surgery would have cost him $40,000 to $80,000, even with insurance. He said he'd been postponing the surgery for 6 months because he couldn't afford it. But the pain became unbearable during his vacation. He pulled out his phone and showed them his itemized hospital estimates from back home. My sister said the numbers looked like annual salaries. The administrator actually apologized that they couldn't bill it any lower. The American laughed and said he'd gladly pay triple what they charged because it was still less than his American deductible. Before he left, asked if he could have multiple copies of the receipt because he said nobody back home would believe him otherwise. My sister gave him 5 copies. He asked for 10. She printed 20. He thanked her like she'd saved his life. She pointed out that the surgeons saved his life. He said, "Yeah, but in America, that would have cost his life savings. So in a way, she'd saved both." On his way out, he asked if Ireland needed software developers. My sister said probably yes. He said he'd look into it. I manage a small hotel in Lisbon, and last month, an American couple checked in for a week-long stay. On their second day, the wife slipped in the bathroom and hit her head pretty hard. We called an ambulance immediately. She spent 4 hours in the emergency room, got a CT scan, 12 stitches, and was prescribed pain medication. The total bill was 97 euros. When I visited them later that day to check on her, I mentioned that she'd need to settle the hospital bill during their stay. The husband started crying and asking if we could set up a payment plan. I was very confused. I told him it was less than 100 euros. He didn't believe me. He made me call the hospital to confirm. The billing department confirmed the amount. He asked if they'd forgotten to bill for the CT scan. They said no, it was included. He asked about the stitches, included the medication, included the ambulance. also included. He put his wife on the phone so she could hear it too, and they both just sat there in stunned silence. Later that evening, the husband came down to the front desk and asked if Portugal was accepting American refugees. I thought he was joking. He pulled out his phone and showed me his hospital bill from when he broke his arm 2 years ago in Atlanta. It was $68,000 for a broken arm. I asked if that was before insurance. He said that was after insurance paid their portion. I asked what his insurance actually covered then. He said they covered about 20%. The rest was his responsibility, used air quotes. I asked if he paid it. He said he's still paying it and will be for another 3 years. His wife added that they'd had to remortgage their house. I didn't know what to say. He asked if I knew any Portuguese immigration lawyers. I gave him a business card for my cousin, who practices immigration law in Porto. He wasn't joking. My father runs a small clinic in Kochi, India, and he told me this story during our weekly phone call. An American medical student had come in for a consultation because she'd been having severe stomach pain for weeks. My father examined her, ordered blood work and an ultrasound, and diagnosed her with gallstones. He recommended surgery to remove her gallbladder. She asked how much it would cost. He told her about $250 for the entire procedure, including a 2-day hospital stay. She laughed and said no. How much for just the consultation today? He said, $60. She stopped laughing. She asked him to repeat the surgery cost. He said $250 total. She asked if that was just the surgeon's fee. He said no, that's everything. The surgery, the anesthesiologist, the hospital room, the nursing care, all medications, post-operative follow-ups, everything. She pulled out her phone and showed him an estimate she'd received from a hospital in Boston. $47,000. My father thought she'd made a mistake with the decimal point. She zoomed in on the number. She hadn't. She asked if she could have the surgery here in India, even though she was only in the country for another 2 weeks. My father said yes, they could schedule it for the next day if she wanted. She agreed immediately. The surgery went perfectly fine. When she came for her follow-up appointment a week later, she told my father she'd done the math, and even including her plane ticket from America to India, the hotel stay, the medical tourism visa, food and transportation, she'd saved over $40,000 by having the surgery here instead of at home. She said she was considering just staying in India and finishing medical school here. My father said we'd love to have her. She asked if Indian medical degrees transfer to America. My father said yes, many Indian-trained doctors work in the US. She said perfect, she'd think about it. Before she left, she asked my father how Indian doctors managed to stay in business charging such low prices. My father explained that healthcare isn't really about profit here, it's about helping people. She said that must be nice. I work as a restaurant manager in Lyon, and last summer we had an American family dining with us. During dessert, the father suddenly grabbed his chest and said he couldn't breathe. His wife started panicking, asking if anyone had a phone to call for help. I immediately called emergency services. The paramedics arrived within 6 minutes, assessed him right there in the restaurant, decided he was having a heart attack, and rushed him to the hospital in the ambulance. His wife and children followed in a taxi. The man ended up needing emergency surgery to place 2 stents in his blocked arteries. He stayed in the hospital for 5 days. When they finally discharged him, the wife came back to our restaurant to thank us for calling the ambulance. She was crying, but she seemed happy. I asked if her husband was okay. She said yes, he was recovering well. Then she asked if we'd received any bills from the hospital or ambulance company addressed to the restaurant. I was very confused. She explained that in America, sometimes they bill the location where the emergency occurred. I told her that's insane and not how things work here. She seemed relieved, then asked approximately how much she should expect to pay for the ambulance, the emergency surgery, the 5-day hospital stay, and all the medications. I told her to ask the hospital, but probably somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 euros. She actually hugged me. Her children started crying too, but like, happy crying. I still didn't fully understand. Later, the wife explained that the same treatment in America would have cost them somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000. Even with their insurance, It would have been responsible for about $60,000 out of pocket, because they hadn't met their annual deductible yet. She said if this had happened in America, they might have had to sell their house. I asked why anyone would design a system like that. She said she'd been asking herself the same question for 20 years. Before they left France, the husband came back to the restaurant, fully recovered, and gave me a bottle of wine and a card. The card said, "Thanks for saving my life and my house." Inside was a €200 tip. I tried to refuse it, explaining that I'd just made a phone call. He insisted, saying that in America, someone would have had to make the financial calculation of whether his life was worth the ambulance bill. I asked if he was serious. He said, completely serious, and that he personally knew 3 people who'd refused ambulances during medical emergencies because they couldn't afford it. One of them died. The wine was excellent, but that conversation haunts me. I own a small optometry practice in Toronto, and last year an American woman came in for an eye exam. Everything was standard until I told her the exam would cost $75 Canadian. She immediately got defensive and said she couldn't afford to pay that if she also needed new glasses. I assured her that the exam fee was separate from glasses, and that if she had vision insurance through her Canadian employer, most of it would be covered anyway. She didn't have Canadian insurance yet because she just moved here for work, but she seemed confused about the price. She asked if that was really the total cost. I confirmed it was. She pulled out a crumpled receipt from her bag and showed me. Her last eye exam bill from Michigan, $498. I asked if that included glasses. She said no, just the exam. She then explained that her American insurance had classified vision as a separate category from medical, so her health insurance didn't cover it. And she didn't have standalone vision insurance, because it cost an additional $60 per month that she couldn't afford. I asked what she did when she needed new glasses. She said she usually ordered them online from China using an old prescription because American optical stores wanted $800 for frames and lenses. I examined her current glasses. They were 3 years old, completely wrong prescription, and probably making her headaches significantly worse. I updated her prescription and recommended she get new glasses soon. She asked how much glasses would cost here. I said probably $200 to $400 depending on her choice of frames and lenses. She actually apologized to me, saying she couldn't afford that right now. I reminded her that in Canada, most employers include vision coverage in their benefits packages, and she should check with her HR department. She did right there in my office. Turns out her benefits covered up to $300 every 2 years. She started crying. I gave her tissues and a glass of water. She kept saying she was sorry for crying, but she'd been getting headaches for years because she couldn't afford to update her prescription. Before she left, she asked me if Canada was really as good as everyone said, or if there was some catch. I told her the winter is brutal. She said she'd take it. My cousin works as an ER nurse in Prague, and she told me this story at Christmas dinner. An American backpacker had come in with what turned out to be a kidney stone. He was in absolute agony. They gave him morphine for the pain, did a CT scan, confirmed the diagnosis, kept him overnight for observation, and sent him home with pain medication and instructions. The entire visit, including all medications and imaging, cost him about 800 Czech koruna, roughly €35. When the billing department gave him the paperwork, he refused to take it. He kept insisting they'd made a mistake and forgotten to add zeros. The billing clerk showed him the itemized breakdown. He started arguing that the CT scan alone should cost thousands of dollars. The clerk very patiently explained that in Czech Republic, healthcare prices are regulated and reasonable. The American said that's impossible. CT scans are expensive machines and someone has to pay for them. The clerk said yes. Society pays for them through taxes so that individual sick people don't go bankrupt. This concept seemed to break his brain entirely. He sat in the waiting room for 2 hours, occasionally walking back to the billing window to ask if they were sure there wasn't more money he owed. Each time, they confirmed the €35 bill was correct and complete. Finally, my cousin went over to talk to him. He explained that he'd had a kidney stone 2 years ago in Denver, and after insurance, he'd paid $9,000 out of pocket. The CT scan alone was billed at $14,000, though insurance negotiated it down to $7,000. He said he'd been making monthly payments ever since, and still owed about $4,000. My cousin asked if he'd considered just not paying it. He looked horrified and explained that medical debt goes to collections, ruins your credit score, prevents you from getting jobs, apartments, or loans. He said his kidney stone was literally still costing him money every single month 2 years later. My cousin didn't know what to say. Before he left, he asked if Czech Republic needed computer programmers. My cousin said probably yes. He said good, because he was seriously considering it. I teach English in a language school in Osaka. One of my adult students is an American woman married to a Japanese man. During a conversation exercise about daily life, she mentioned that she'd given birth to her daughter last year. Another student asked about her experience with Japanese hospitals. She started crying. At first I thought something had gone wrong, but then she explained these were happy tears. She said the entire pregnancy care, all checkups, the birth itself, 3 days in the hospital, had cost them about $4,000 total. The other students seemed confused about why this was emotional. One of them said, $4,000 seemed expensive. The American woman laughed and cried harder. She explained that in America, giving birth costs anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000 depending on complications. And that's with insurance. Without insurance, it can be over $100,000. One of my students said for creating a human baby? The American woman nodded. Another student asked what poor people do. The American woman said they often go into crippling debt or avoid prenatal care entirely, which leads to worse outcomes. A third student, an elderly man, asked how America expects people to have children if pregnancy costs 5 years of savings. The American woman said exactly. And that birth rates in America have been declining partly because young people literally cannot afford to have babies. The whole class went silent. Another student asked why Americans accept this system. The American woman said, most Americans don't have a choice, and any politician who suggests changing it gets accused of being a communist. The elderly student said that sounded like a hostage situation. The American woman said yes, basically. We ended class early that day. Several students stayed behind to ask her more questions about American healthcare. She answered everything very patiently, but she looked exhausted. One student asked if she planned to move back to America. She said absolutely not, and that having experienced Japanese healthcare, she could never go back. She said returning to the American system would feel like time traveling backward to a darker age. Another student asked if many Americans felt this way. She said yes, but most can't afford to leave. The student asked what happens to them. The American woman just shook her head. I work in customs at Auckland Airport, and a few months ago, I processed an American man who'd come to New Zealand for a scheduled hip replacement surgery. This was unusual enough that I asked him about it during the standard entry interview. He explained that the surgery would cost him $12,000 here in New Zealand, including the surgeon's fee, the hospital stay, the prosthetic hip, all medications, and post-operative physical therapy. He seemed very happy about this. I told him that sounded quite expensive for New Zealand, and he'd probably be better off going through the public system if he qualified. He said he'd looked into it, but since he wasn't a resident, he couldn't use the public system, so he was paying private prices. I asked how much the same surgery would cost in America. He said somewhere between $60,000 and $80,000, even with insurance. I thought he was joking. He showed me written estimates from 3 different American hospitals on his phone. He was not joking. I asked if his insurance wouldn't cover it. He said they would cover some of it, but his deductible was $15,000. And then after that, they'd only pay 70%. So he'd still end up paying about $25,000 to $30,000 out of pocket. By coming to New Zealand, paying for the surgery completely out of pocket, buying round-trip airfare, staying in a hotel for 3 weeks during recovery, and eating out for every meal, he'd still save at least $10,000 compared to having it done in America. I asked if this was common. He said medical tourism from America to literally anywhere else in the world has become a massive industry. And there are entire companies that arrange these trips. He showed me a website that compared surgery costs across different countries. A heart bypass that costs $300,000 in America costs $15,000 in Thailand. A knee replacement that's $50,000 in America is $7,000 in Mexico. He He said he knew several people who'd done this. Before I waved him through customs, I asked if he ever considered just moving to a country with better health care. He said his whole family is in America, and his kids are in school there, so moving isn't realistic. But he added that if he were younger and single, he'd have left years ago. I told him I hoped his surgery went well. He thanked me, then said that even if it went terribly wrong, at least he wouldn't go bankrupt over it. He said this like it was a comfort. It wasn't comforting at all. I'm a taxi driver in Barcelona, and last month, I picked up an American couple from the airport. They'd come to Spain specifically for the husband to get dental implants. During the drive to their hotel, they explained the whole situation. He needed for dental implants. In California, the dentist quoted him $54,000 for the procedure. His insurance classified dental work as cosmetic and wouldn't cover any of it. So instead, they'd found a dental clinic in Barcelona that would do the same procedure for 8,000 euros.
Ow.
Even with the plane tickets, hotel, and vacation expenses, they'd still save over $30,000. I asked if the Spanish dentist was properly qualified. They showed me his credentials on their phone. He'd trained at one of Spain's top dental schools and had 20 years of experience. They'd read hundreds of reviews from other medical tourists. Everything checked out. I asked if they were nervous about getting medical procedures in a foreign country. The wife said yes, terrified, but more terrified of spending $50,000. She said that money represented their entire retirement savings account. If they'd paid the American price, they'd have to work for another 10 years before they could retire. By coming to Spain, they could get the dental work done, enjoy a 2-week vacation, and still have money left over. I dropped them at their hotel and wished them luck. 3 days later, I picked them up again to take them to the dental clinic. The husband was nervous. His wife held his hand the whole drive. I waited outside for 3 hours. When they came out, the husband's mouth was numb from anesthesia, but he gave me a thumbs up. The wife said everything went perfectly, and the clinic was more modern and cleaner than most American dental offices she'd seen. 5 days later, I drove them back for their follow-up appointment. The husband could talk normally again. He said the implants felt perfect, and the pain was minimal, before I dropped them at the airport for their flight home. The wife asked me if a lot of Americans come to Spain for medical procedures. I said yes, dental work especially, but also surgeries. She shook her head and said America is broken. I didn't disagree. I worked the ticket counter at a bus station in Oslo. And last week an American student came up asking about routes to Sweden, while I was looking up schedules. She mentioned she was considering transferring to a university in Stockholm for her final year. I asked why she'd leave Norway when we have excellent universities here. She said it wasn't about the education quality, it was about healthcare access. This confused me. She explained that she has type 1 diabetes and requires insulin to survive. In America, her insulin costs about $700 per month, even with her parents' insurance. Her parents spend over $8,000 per year just keeping her alive. She'd researched insulin prices across Europe and found that in most countries, including Norway and Sweden, the same insulin costs between $30 and $60 per month, sometimes less. By studying abroad, even after paying international student tuition, she'd save her family thousands of dollars per year. I asked if her American insurance wouldn't work internationally. She said it barely works in America. I printed out her bus ticket and told her that in Norway, once she's registered as a student, she'd be covered under our national health system and her insulin. Costs would be capped at around $40 per month regardless of the actual price. She stared at the ticket in her hands and started crying. I offered her tissues. She apologized and said she'd been rationing her insulin for the past 3 months to make it stretch, which her doctor explicitly told her never to do because it could kill her. But she'd felt guilty about the cost to her parents. She said the idea of not having to think about money every time she takes a life-saving medication felt surreal. I told her she shouldn't have to think about it. Nobody should die because they can't afford medicine. She said that happens in America all the time. I asked her if she was serious.